Hey, in this video I want to talk about network connections and APIs, application programming interfaces, for communicating across networks. So at the very basic level, connections need to be made between networked computers. So typically this is done as what's called a socket or a network socket. A socket is just a software object, just this concept, that can represent a connection to another network device. Originally, when they were first invented, they were meant to replicate the interactions you would have with a file. So you could open a file, read or write into a file, and close a file. And we could treat network connections kind of the same way. You can open a connection with someone, you can read information that they send to you, and you can write information to send it to them, and then close the connection at any point. So to establish a socket connection, we're going to need a protocol type, something like TCP or UDP. We'll have to decide on that. We'll need an IP address, and we'll need a port. So those three things. So first of all, what is an IP address? Well, it's a network-wide address for one device. And every device on a network is going to have its own unique IP address. So how do I find my IP address? How do I know what to put in for someone else's IP address? Well, let's try a couple of things. First, let's try click into your start menu, type in CMD, and open up a command prompt window. So with your command prompt, you can enter all sorts of commands. There are some built-in ones. And let's check out this one, ipconfig. This one just displays some information about your local network. And you can see here, the only one that lists off IP addresses is here in my wireless LAN adapter. And so here's an IP address. This one, however, if I sent this to someone online and they tried to connect to me from their house, this wouldn't work. This is a local IP address. And it would work if they were using the same Wi-Fi as me. That would be fine. But if they are outside of my local network, they have to use a different IP address to refer to me across the wider internet. And that's one of the properties of routers these days. Routers establish a local network, and they also deal with routing traffic properly to the computers that need to get that traffic. So your IP address is going to differ on larger networks beyond your router. So to figure out what your global IP is, you're probably going to have to ask a computer you're already connected to. So you connect to your internet service provider, and they provide you an IP address. So we're going to have to look it up. Let's see, my IP. Okay, so there's one. This is an example of a public IP address, and Google is nice enough to just show it to us. So if someone typed this in, they could connect directly to my computer, assuming that they are connecting to a proper port and everything. And so you kind of have to understand this, what an IP address represents. It's really just an identifier for my device on this network. And you have to know what a port is. And a port is really just a local connection resource ID. It's just a number, and my computer can connect on these different ports, can kind of set up a socket on any one of these ports. But some ports are kind of set aside for different uses. So here's a list of TCP and UDP port numbers. And just checking it out, there's a standards organization that establishes official port numbers for a certain purpose. So like one that I use commonly is port 22 for SSH, secure shell. And there are a lot of pre-registered port numbers that you should not be using. But in general, you can just pick a number, make sure that it doesn't collide with someone that has already registered it and is using it, and it's pretty much free to use from there. All right, so if we're going to be writing client-server code and we want to communicate between two computers, we're going to need an API. We're going to need an application programming interface, some way of knowing what the information means that we're sending across the network. So there are several different styles of APIs out there. I'll just mention two big ones. So remote procedure calls, RPCs, is one way to do it. This is essentially trying to call a function on the other computer directly. So you need to know that this function is available. You're communicating directly with a specific application, a program, like a game. And so this might be the case when you've written code for a client program and you've written code for a server program, and they know how to communicate with each other. They know what functions to call. So you can specify which functions to call, provide the arguments, that information gets sent over the wire, and the function is called on the other side, as long as it passes some basic rules. So this is easiest to implement with a message passing system, and some programming languages have that built in. Unity provides the send message function on, I believe it's on mono behaviors, and so send message implements that kind of system, and so that makes it easy to do RPCs, remote procedure calls, on other programs, or well, on programs that are using Unity as a game engine. Another API option is REST. You may have heard of this one. This is extremely widely used on web servers. REST, R-E-S-T, it stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's kind of a set of protocols for how websites and computers, browsers, should interact with each other. So there are several common verbs that they use in this system: post, get, put, patch, and delete. Post and get are the most useful ones, the most used. So that's what you'll see the most. And you can essentially post to a website, send an HTTP post request, and it will send information to that server, or it'll tell the server to do something with some information. And you can send a GET request to a server to retrieve information from it. So that's what your browser typically does all day long, is sending post and GET requests to websites, to web servers, and displaying the results of that to you on a web page. Alright, so that's how kind of a overview of some of these different network connections and APIs, and I'll see you in the next video.